There are moments in a believer's life when something small, something quiet, carries a reward so azim that the mind struggles to comprehend it. A day passes, a fast is observed, hunger is felt, thirst is endured, and outwardly it seems simple, but in the unseen world something far greater is being recorded. A reward that is not just multiplied, but purified, elevated, and hidden as a mercy from the most generous. Among these special days, there is a day that stands out not because of difficulty, but because of divine opportunity, where a single act of worship can become a means of wiping away the traces of a year gone by and opening the doors to a cleaner beginning. Yet only those who understand its value truly benefit from it. There are certain moments in a believer's life when Allah opens a door of mercy that is far greater than what the human mind can immediately comprehend. The fast of Ashura is one of those moments. On the surface, it appears simple. A person wakes up, makes intention, stays away from food and drink, and completes the day in obedience. But in the sight of Allah, nothing about this act is ordinary. It is not just about hunger or thirst. It is about recognition, humility, and turning to Allah with a heart that understands the value of time and opportunity. When we reflect on the promise connected to this day, we are reminded that Allah does not deal with His servants in equal measure to their effort alone, but in accordance with His infinite mercy. A single sincere fast on this day becomes a means of expiation for the sins of an entire year. This is not something a human being could ever earn through physical strength or financial sacrifice alone. It is purely a gift from the Lord of the worlds, who wants to cleanse His servants more than they want to be cleansed. But the key here is understanding what this expiation truly means and how it transforms the believer internally before it even reflects externally. When a person fasts on Ashura with sincerity, they are not merely abstaining from food. They are stepping into a state of awareness where every moment of the day becomes an act of remembrance. The hunger that is felt is not meaningless discomfort. It becomes a reminder of dependence. The thirst is not just physical. It becomes a reminder that everything we enjoy is a blessing that can be taken away at any moment. And in that state of awareness, the heart softens. A softened heart begins to look back at the past year, and suddenly, the sins that once felt small or forgotten start to feel heavy in the presence of divine awareness. Yet, Allah in His mercy does not place this burden on the believer without offering a path to relief. Instead, He gives a day where the believer can stand before Him in a state of humility and say, even with their silence, that they are seeking forgiveness. And Allah, who already knows every hidden mistake and every silent regret, opens the door of expiation. This is where the believer begins to understand that forgiveness is not only about asking with words, but about returning to Allah through action. The fast itself becomes a declaration that the servant wants to be purified. What is even more beautiful is that this expiation is connected to something deeply personal. It is not about comparing oneself with others. It is not about being better than someone else. It is about the individual soul standing before its Creator and being given an opportunity to reset. A whole year of minor slips, moments of forgetfulness, small mistakes, lapses in patience, weaknesses in speech, and flaws in intention are all covered under the shade of divine mercy for those who fast with sincerity. And this creates a powerful realization in the heart that Allah is not waiting to punish, but waiting to forgive. However, this mercy is not meant to make a person careless. It is meant to make them grateful and conscious. Because when someone knows that a single sincere act can erase a year's worth of shortcomings, it changes the way they approach their entire life. It makes them more attentive in their daily worship. It makes them more cautious with their tongue. It makes them more reflective before they act. Not because they are afraid alone, but because they have tasted the sweetness of divine generosity and do not want to lose it. The fast of Ashura also teaches that Allah values consistency and sincerity over complexity. It is not a difficult ritual that requires wealth or physical hardship beyond reach. It is accessible. Yet within its simplicity lies an ocean of reward. This is a reminder that in Islam, Greatness is not always found in what is visible or what appears impressive to people. Sometimes the greatest rewards are attached to the simplest actions, but only for those who recognize their worth. When a believer understands that their past year can be spiritually cleansed through a single day of fasting, it should not lead them to delay or neglect, but rather to gratitude and urgency. Gratitude that such a door exists at all, and urgency, because opportunities like this are not guaranteed to return in the same way. Many people live through days of mercy without realizing what they are passing by. But the one whose heart is awake sees these moments as treasures placed in time by Allah. And in that awareness, the fast becomes more than just an act of worship. It becomes a moment of return. A return from distraction to remembrance. A return from heedlessness to awareness. A return from heaviness of sin to the lightness of forgiveness. It becomes a quiet but powerful conversation between a servant who is imperfect and a Lord who is endlessly forgiving. When we reflect on this day, we are not only looking at a fast in isolation, but at a moment that carries deep meaning of gratitude and awareness. Gratitude is not just a word that we say with the tongue. It is a state of the heart that recognizes where we were saved from, what we were given, and how we continue to be carried by mercy, even when we do not fully understand it. The fast of Ashura brings this feeling to life in a very natural way, because it connects us to a history of survival, guidance, and divine rescue that reminds the believer that they are never abandoned. There are moments in history when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved his servants in ways that defied expectation, when everything seemed closed, and yet a path opened from where no human planning could ever create it. When the believer reflects on this, they begin to realize that their own life is filled with similar unseen rescues. Times when they thought things were going to break them, but something changed. Times when they thought there was no way forward, but a door appeared. Times when they were spiritually lost, but guidance found its way into their heart. And all of this becomes a reason to pause and say that this is not random, this is mercy. Fasting on this day becomes a way of expressing that gratitude without needing many words. It is a silent acknowledgement that Allah has given more than we deserve and protected us in ways we cannot count. When a person goes through the day of fasting, there is a natural softness that begins to develop. Hunger and thirst are not just physical experiences. They become reminders that everything we enjoy every day without thinking is actually a blessing. The simple glass of water, the meal we often rush through, the comfort we take for granted, all of it suddenly feels meaningful when it is temporarily taken away for the sake of Allah. And in that state of awareness, gratitude starts to rise in a very real way. Not forced, not artificial, but natural. Because when the body experiences limitation, the heart begins to notice what it usually ignores. A believer starts to realize that life itself is a gift, that faith itself is a gift, and that even the ability to remember Allah is something that should never be taken lightly. This is why this day is not just about fasting, it is about remembering. Remembering what Allah has done for us, and remembering what we often forget when life becomes easy. The beauty of gratitude in this context is that it shifts the way a person sees their entire life. Instead of constantly focusing on what is missing, they begin to see what has already been given. Instead of feeling empty, they begin to feel full in a different way. Because gratitude fills spaces that material things cannot fill. A heart that is grateful is never truly poor, even if it has little in the world, because it recognizes richness in guidance, in protection, and in faith. And when a believer connects this gratitude to the fast of Ashura, they begin to see that this is not just a historical remembrance, but a personal reminder. It is as if Allah is telling each servant, look at how I have saved before. Look at how I continue to save. Look at how I have never left you without mercy, even when you were unaware of it. And that realization creates a quiet humility in the heart. A humility that does not shout, but feels deeply within. There is also something very powerful about how gratitude changes a person's relationship with worship. When worship is done with gratitude, it no longer feels like a burden. it becomes a response to kindness already received, a response to protection already given, a response to blessings already present. And this makes the act of fasting feel lighter, even though the physical challenge remains the same. Because the heart is no longer focused on difficulty, it is focused on meaning. The fast of this day also reminds us that gratitude is not only for big events or major miracles, but also for the quiet and hidden moments of protection that we never noticed. There are countless situations where harm was diverted, where mistakes were covered, where doors were closed in our face but turned out to be mercy in disguise. And most of the time we only understand this much later, if at all. But Allah is always aware, and He invites us to recognize that awareness through acts of worship that reconnect us with reality. When a person fasts with this understanding, something changes in their perception of time. The day is no longer just passing hours, it becomes a journey of reflection. Each moment becomes a reminder of dependence on Allah. Each moment becomes an opportunity to feel thankful, even in discomfort. And slowly, the heart begins to soften in a way that cannot be easily described. It is a softness that comes from recognizing that nothing is truly under control except by the permission of Allah. And in that recognition, gratitude is no longer just a feeling for a day. It becomes a mindset that starts to extend beyond the fast itself. The believer begins to carry it into their speech, their actions, their relationships, and even their thoughts. Because once the heart understands how much it has been saved, it cannot return to complete heedlessness without feeling the weight of awareness. When we look at this day and the fast connected to it, one of the most powerful lessons hidden within it is the reality of intention. On the surface, fasting may look like a single act, a shared experience that many people go through in the same hours, under the same sun, feeling the same hunger and thirst. But in the sight of Allah, nothing is identical if the intention behind it is different. This is where the believer begins to understand something very deep about their relationship with their Creator. That what truly matters is not only what is done, but why it is done, and what is present in the heart at the moment of doing it. Two people may stand side by side in fasting. Both may not eat, both may not drink, both may complete the same day. But the weight of their deeds in the unseen world can be completely different. One may be fasting as a habit, something inherited, something done because others are doing it. The other may be fasting with awareness, knowing the significance of the day, recognizing the mercy attached to it, and seeking the pleasure of Allah with a conscious heart. Outwardly they are the same, but inwardly they are not equal. This is where intentions becomes the hidden foundation of everything. Intention is not something that is always loud or visible. It is quiet, but it carries weight. It is what transforms ordinary actions into acts of worship. Without intention, even good deeds can become routine. With intention, even simple acts become meaningful in the sight of Allah. And on a day like this, the fast becomes a mirror that shows the believer what is truly inside their heart. Are they doing it just because it is expected, or are they doing it because they understand who they are doing it for? This is why sincerity is so important, because sincerity changes everything. It is not about the scale of the action, but the purity of the purpose behind it. A small action done with sincerity can outweigh large actions done without it. And the fast of this day becomes a moment where sincerity is tested in a very quiet way. No one is watching except Allah. No one is measuring except Allah. And the believer stands between hunger and intention, between effort and meaning, between routine and awareness. When a person fasts with correct intention, even their discomfort becomes worship. The hunger they feel is no longer just physical. It becomes a reminder of obedience. The thirst becomes a reminder of dependence. And every passing hour becomes a reminder that this is not just a day of restriction, but a day of devotion. But when intention is weak or absent, the same physical experience passes without depth. The body goes through the motion, but the heart remains distant. This is the difference that intention creates. And it is a difference that only Allah fully knows. There is also a very subtle danger when intention is ignored. A person may perform good deeds for recognition, habit, or social expectation, but the reward tied to sincerity may not reach them in the same way. This is why intention is not something small. It is the soul of every action. Without it, actions can lose their spiritual depth, even if they appear correct on the outside. And on this day, the believer is reminded that Allah is not looking at appearances alone, but at what lies beneath them. What makes this reality even more profound is that intention can be renewed at any moment. A person who begins their fast without full awareness can still correct their intention during the day. They can turn their heart back to Allah, remind themselves of why they are doing it, and reconnect their action to its true purpose. This means that mercy is always present, even in moments of weakness or forgetfulness. Allah does not close the door of sincerity. He keeps it open for those who return to it. When a believer becomes conscious of intention, their entire approach to worship begins to change. They no longer see acts of worship as empty routines. They begin to see them as personal conversations with their Creator. Each action becomes intentional, each moment becomes meaningful, and each deed becomes an opportunity to draw closer to Allah. Even silence during fasting becomes meaningful when it is filled with awareness. And in this awareness, something very beautiful begins to happen inside the heart. The believer starts to feel that they are not just going through a day, but they are actively choosing their closeness to Allah. Every moment becomes a choice between distraction and remembrance, between habit and sincerity, between emptiness and meaning. And intention becomes the quiet force that guides those choices. This is why the fast of this day is not just about physical discipline. It is about internal alignment. It is about making sure that what is inside matches what is outside. Because Allah does not accept actions based on appearance alone, but on the truth that lives in the heart behind those actions. When a believer reflects deeply on the fast of this day, one of the most powerful realizations they come to is that Allah does not always attach greatness to what appears complex in the eyes of people. Instead, He places immense value in simplicity when it is paired with obedience, consistency, and love. In a world where people often associate worth with difficulty, size, or visibility, this truth comes as a reminder that the standards of Allah are completely different from the standards of this world. Many people assume that the most valuable acts of worship must be the hardest ones, the ones that require wealth, effort, or long periods of sacrifice. But the mercy of Allah shows something different. Sometimes a simple act done quietly, without attention or recognition, carries a weight that is far greater in the unseen world than actions that seem impressive outwardly. This is because Allah looks at the heart, the sincerity, and the consistency behind the action, not just the physical effort involved. The fast of this day is a clear example of this reality. It does not require travel. It does not require special conditions. It does not require wealth or complicated preparation. It is simple in its form. A person wakes up with intention, holds back from what is normally allowed, and spends the day in a state of obedience. Outwardly, it seems easy compared to many other forms of struggle. But in the sight of Allah, this simple act can carry immense reward because of what it represents internally. This teaches the believer something very important about how Allah values obedience. It is not always about how much a person does, but about how faithfully they do what has been asked of them. Consistency in small acts often carries more weight than rare moments of greatness followed by neglect. A person who regularly remembers Allah in simple ways, who maintains their worship even when it feels ordinary, is often closer in sincerity than someone who only turns to worship in moments of intensity. There is also a deep wisdom in how simplicity keeps the heart humble. When worship is easy and accessible, it removes excuses. It removes the idea that closeness to Allah is only for a special group of people, or only for those with extraordinary ability. It becomes a mercy that everyone can reach, regardless of their background, strength, or circumstances. This universality is part of the beauty of Islam. It makes the path to Allah open, not restricted. On this day, when a believer fasts in simplicity, they are reminded that greatness is not always loud. Sometimes, the most powerful acts are the ones that no one notices. There is no crowd watching, no public recognition, no outward celebration. Yet in that quiet space, something very significant is happening. A servant is choosing obedience over desire, remembrance over negligence, and devotion over distraction. And Allah, who sees what no one else sees, values that choice in a way that the world cannot measure. This also shifts the way a person looks at their daily life. They begin to understand that even small actions, when done consistently for the sake of Allah, are never wasted. Smiling with sincerity, speaking kindly, restraining anger, remembering Allah in brief moments, and maintaining simple acts of worship all become part of a continuous relationship with the Creator. Nothing is insignificant when it is connected to Him. And perhaps one of the most comforting aspects of this understanding is that it removes pressure from the heart. A believer does not always have to search for extraordinary actions to feel close to Allah. Instead, they are reminded that their consistency in simple obedience is already valuable. This creates a sense of stability in worship. It is not dependent on moments of motivation alone, but on steady connection. At the same time, simplicity in worship also protects the heart from pride. When acts are not complicated or publicly praised, there is less room for showing off or seeking attention. The action remains between the servant and Allah, pure in its intention. And this purity is what gives it strength in the unseen world. So when a believer fasts on this day, they are not just practicing physical restraint. They are learning a deeper lesson about value, about what truly matters in the sight of Allah. They are learning that obedience does not need to be complicated to be accepted, and that the smallest sincere act can carry a weight far beyond what the eye can see. When a believer reflects deeply on the mercy of Allah, one of the most overlooked realities is that consistency in small acts of obedience carries a weight that the heart only begins to understand over time. Many people think that spiritual growth comes from occasional intense moments of worship, long prayers, or sudden bursts of devotion. But the truth that slowly settles in the heart of a sincere believer is that Allah values what is steady, what is continuous, and what is done even when no one is watching and when motivation is low. This is where the real transformation begins, not in dramatic moments, but in quiet repetition. A person who continues to fast, continues to remember Allah, continues to stay away from what is wrong, even when it feels ordinary or unnoticed, is actually building something far deeper than they realize. They are building a connection that is not dependent on emotions, but on commitment. And this is one of the greatest signs of sincerity, because sincerity is not always loud. Sometimes it is silent discipline. When we think about acts of worship, we often underestimate the value of repetition. The human mind naturally seeks excitement and variation, but the soul grows through stability. A believer who trains themselves to stay consistent in simple acts begins to notice a change in their heart. Their worship becomes less about obligation and more about identity. They are no longer just doing good deeds. They are becoming someone who naturally leans toward goodness. This is a hidden mercy of Allah that many do not recognize immediately, because consistency in small acts slowly reshapes the heart without force. It is not sudden, it is gradual. Like water shaping stone, it does not happen in one moment, but over time it creates a transformation that cannot be ignored. A person may not notice it daily, but after some time they realize their heart reacts differently, their choices feel different, and their awareness of Allah becomes stronger even in ordinary situations. The fast of this day and every similar act of worship becomes part of this process. It teaches the believer that closeness to Allah is not limited to rare occasions, but is built through repeated obedience. And when something is repeated sincerely, it becomes part of who you are. Not just an action you perform, but a direction your heart naturally takes. One of the most beautiful aspects of consistency is that it protects a person from spiritual highs and lows. Many people experience moments where their faith feels very strong, and other times where it feels weak. But consistency acts like a bridge that keeps the connection alive even when emotions fluctuate. It prevents complete disconnection. Even if the feeling is low, the action continues. And in that continuation, mercy is still present. This is why small deeds are never small in the sight of Allah. A single repeated action done sincerely can carry immense weight because of its continuity. It shows persistence. It shows loyalty. It shows that the servant is not dependent on perfect conditions to obey their Lord. And this is something Allah loves deeply because it reflects a heart that is anchored, not scattered. There is also something very humbling about consistency. It removes arrogance from the heart. When a person knows they are not doing something extraordinary, but they are still committed to it for the sake of Allah, their ego slowly softens. They begin to realize that success in worship is not about competition or comparison, but about personal connection and steady effort. And perhaps one of the most powerful effects of consistency is that it builds trust between the servant and Allah. The servant proves through action that they are committed, and in return, Allah opens doors of guidance, ease, and understanding that were not previously visible. This trust is not spoken, it is lived through actions over time. Even in moments of weakness, consistency has a way of bringing a person back. A person may slip, may become distracted, may feel distant, but because they have built a habit of returning, they find their way back more easily. This return itself becomes part of their spiritual strength. It teaches them that falling is not the end, but staying away is the real loss. When a believer understands this, their entire perspective on worship changes. They stop waiting for perfect motivation. They stop delaying good deeds for better times. Instead, they focus on what they can maintain, even if it is small. Because they realize that Allah does not only look at the size of the action, but at its sincerity and its continuity. And in this understanding, life becomes more balanced. Worship becomes part of daily rhythm, not just special occasions. The heart becomes calmer, less dependent on emotional extremes, and more rooted in steady remembrance of Allah. This is where true spiritual stability begins to form. So when a believer fasts, remembers and obeys in simple ways consistently, they are not just performing isolated acts. They are building a path that leads them closer to Allah step by step, moment by moment, without even realizing how far they have come. And this is the quiet power of consistency, that it transforms the ordinary into something deeply meaningful in the sight of Allah. And if you are listening to this reminder, then take it as a simple request for the sake of goodness. Subscribe this channel, stay connected, and continue to benefit from reminders that bring the heart back to Allah.